What has consciousness got to do with our friends in space, humanity's evolution, and our ability to evolve and be a part of a cosmic family, a cosmic solution? Well, a lot. And we're going to discuss that today, how our galactic family have been teaching us and wanting us to evolve into a more expanded and aware state of consciousness. And I've got the fabulous Grant Cameron back on the show. It's been 6 years since we last spoke. Stay tuned.
You got to accentuate the positive. I feel good. A little bit of feel good goes a long way.
You're listening to Karen Swain, teacher of deliberate creation, accentuating the positive, showing you a way to a better life.
Accentuating the positive, it's not just fad, it's sanity. Who in their right mind would accentuate anything else?
If you feel like that's what you want to do.
G'day. Welcome to another show, Accentuating the Positive with Karen Swain on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network, syndicated radio in 120 countries on 107.7 and 105.3 FM, all over the place. We're streaming on 8 platforms today. You know the ones: Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Odyssey, and Roku. And remember to subscribe if you're listening to any of us on, if you listen to us on any of those platforms. And I've got the fabulous Grant Cameron back on the show. Welcome, Grant. So great to have you back on the show. Oh, let me unmute you. Hang on, we've muted you.
Oh, sorry.
Welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you. Good morning, and thanks for having me on. I always appreciate our conversations. And as with you, I'm very surprised it's been 6 years.
I know. So I had Grant on the show because we spoke about his book Tuned In last time, which just blew me away. We've got the girls in Canada wishing you hello. And Alison, Shirley, Penny. I've got all the girls online today. Sherry. Hi, girls. Hi, ladies. So we were speaking about Tuned In. Where's that book? Last time, which was just amazing to me. I actually speak about it often because I was just blown away at how many musicians were contacted by ET to put the message in the music. So we spoke about that 6 years ago. It just blew me away how many songs. I'm going to tell you a story. I had a friend singing at a women's pool. It's a women's only pool, which is unusual in these days, but they had their 100th anniversary, and she was singing Neil Young's song After the Gold Rush.
Oh, yeah.
And I said to her, you know that song's about ETs? And she says, it is not. And she's like sung it a million times. I said, have you read the words? And she's like, yeah, of course I've read the words. I sing it all the time. I said, read the words. And she read it. And she's like, oh my God. So it's so interesting that people are singing away this stuff and they're not even realizing what they're singing half the time.
Yeah. Did you ask her if she was an experiencer? Because that was what sort of got me, was when Chris Bledsoe phoned me and he was talking about it. He said, you got to listen. And I said, I'm a music guy. I don't know anything about music. I couldn't care less. I'm a radio talk guy and stuff. And he said, you got to listen to this song After the Gold Rush. And then he said it was by Neil Young. And I said, Neil Young? And then he said, yeah, Neil Young. And it was a synchronicity that I live in Canada, and I live now on the West Coast, but I used to live in Winnipeg, which is the coldest major city in the world. And even the Canadians don't want to visit in Winnipeg. And I'm saying, Neil Young grew up in Winnipeg. And it was this sort of thing where I said, oh, come and check this out. And I went and I checked it out and looked at the lyrics, and I went, wow, because they're talking about The Chosen, which is, if you look at Yvonne Smith, who is the regressionist in Los Angeles, she called the experiencers The Chosen. And I'm going, this is really weird. And then I started to find out that all these people, like Patti Smith, who's the first woman to sing on Saturday Night Live, she actually believed she was dropped in the earth. She was an extraterrestrial. She sang the song, and then the Flaming Lips sang the song, and all these people. And I started looking at them, and they're all experiencers. And I don't think they knew either that they were singing this song that had to do with ETs. It was a really weird thing that really got me going when I realized how many of these people were experiencers. And that's where I went, and I started to realize, like, almost all the musicians. At one point, I thought they had every musician in Canada, because as I said, used to come from Winnipeg, and Winnipeg was famous for its bands. And one of the biggest bands we had was the Guess Who, which in the late 1960s, early 1970s, were outselling the Beatles in Canada. So the lead singer was Burton Cummings. And I remember I said, wow, I think they got everybody. I said, I wonder if they got Burton Cummings. So I go on to Burton Cummings' Facebook page, and he said, I see he's writing in capitals. He's yelling, and he said, "I don't give a whatever about people what they believe. They're oppressing Whitley Strieber, and I know how he feels." I'm going, wow. So that's when at one point I go, wow. I think everybody they got, and they seem to go after the lead singer. They don't go after the drummer or anything. They always seem to go after the lead singer. And then I realized that the Beatles had contacts, and that the Rolling Stones had contacts. And it was just sort of like very bizarre. But then you get musicians who are very sort of left-brained, and you'll find a lot of experiencers they're very right-brained, female-brained, and the same as experiencers. And it's the idea that if you can shut down the male, ego, I want to have a fight, I want a urinating contest and stuff like that, and tap into the right brain, the female brain. So most musicians are very right-brained. In fact, if you take a look, the other surprising thing, you find out how many are experiencers. The other thing you'll find out is very surprising is how many of them cannot read and write music. It's just like almost all of them. And even McCartney said, "I've never played a scale, and I never intend to play a scale. I think that would ruin what I do." So what they're doing as musicians is, I would ask a lot of musicians, I'd say, "So you ever get a song in the middle of the night in a dream?" And they go, "Oh yeah." And then I'd say, "Well, tell me what the song was." Or, "Do you ever get a song that comes instantaneously?" And then I'd ask them, like, "So where do songs come from?" And they go, "I don't know." And because they're sitting there waiting for a song to come. And it's almost like Neil, and there was what was his name? He was on 60 Minutes. He won the Nobel Prize for his music. But anyway, he wrote "Blowing in the Wind," Dylan. So they asked him, they said, "Well, so you wrote that in 10 minutes, Blowing in the Wind?" And he said, yeah, I guess about 10 minutes. Yeah. And they said, "Well, where'd it come from?" "I don't know. I guess it came from that field of creativity, I guess." So he didn't know. And that's the thing, because musicians are sitting there waiting for songs to come in, and they open themselves up. It's the same thing if you do channeling or if you do meditation. You open yourself up, and the message comes in. God talks to everybody, but only certain people are listening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's so much to talk about, and I haven't even read your bio, so I wanted to mention a few of your books for people that don't know who Grant Cameron is. Let me just tell you a little bit about him. Grant Cameron became involved in ufology at the end of the Vietnam War back in '75. Grant,
50 years in May, it'll be 50 years.
Wow, May, yeah, with a personal sighting of a UFO, which locally became known as Charlie Red Star. These sightings led to a decade of research into the early work done by the Canadian government into flying saucer phenomena. Grant became the authority of the government program. And from here, Grant proceeded to do almost 2 decades of research into the role of the President of the United States in the UFO mystery. Most of that research can be found at the President's UFO website. Is that still up and running?
No, it's not up. I had a big website. It was a very fancy website. And then the guy who was running it said, "Oh, I lost my job. I can't do your website anymore." And I go, "What?" so I had to give it, because I couldn't do anything on the website. It was just really complex website that he had. It was brilliant when it was up. But I collected all the material, and hopefully I'll put out a book on what I learned. But no, it's not up anymore. Most of my stuff now is like everything else. It's podcasts, and it's doing the stuff, because the average attention span of people in the United States is 8 seconds, and that's, you got to do it fast. That's why we're going into audio rather than books and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, you've been involved in government research, and I was talking to Grant before we went live about all the government research that's coming out now, because you were a recipient of the Leeds Conference of International Research of the Year and the UFO Congress Research of the Year. And he is one of the 40 witnesses that testified in front of 6 ex-senators and congressmen in Washington for the Citizens Hearing UFO on Disclosure. What year was that?
That was 2013.
2013. So all this disclosure stuff has come out in Congress. And I asked Grant before, are they getting you involved in this? And you were saying that no, they're just about nuts and bolts. They're not into sort of they're not talking to experiences, which I found really interesting.
Yeah. People will talk about. We actually had a sort of an engagement. You wouldn't have heard because it's been 6 years, but we actually had an engagement with Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon. And they were, I had set up a little circus thing I was going to run where 10 MPs from the Canadian government had suddenly decided they wanted to come public about UFOs. And the one guy was briefing all these guys behind the scenes. So I went to his aide, the parliamentary aide, and I said, well, if you talk to Larry Maguire, we'll set up 4 expert witnesses in the United States, and you can bring these 10 high-level members of parliament forward, and they can just ask questions because they don't know what's going on. And I have these 4 guys, and anybody in the world that wants to broadcast this thing can broadcast this thing, and we'll go from there. And so I was on with Lou Elizondo and with Chris Mellon, and they were going to bring in Gary Nolan and Avi Loeb and stuff. Those would be the 4 witnesses. And they were having this discussion. I said, well, you got to bring military witnesses, and you got to get in front of committees. And I said, well, we don't have any military witnesses. And this is Canada. We don't have the big military and all this kind of stuff. We don't have any military witnesses that are interfering with our airspace and all this kind of stuff. And then they kept insisting, and the ministerial aide had said to them, well, no, we want to do a scientific investigation. And what this thing was going to be for the Prime Minister, Trudeau. His science advisor, what this thing was going to be a cover. We were going to run this thing with the 10 MPs, and it would be all over the news. Like, oh, I didn't know all these MPs were involved in UFOs and stuff like that. And then the science advisor to the Prime Minister would say, oh, look, people are interested. We should do a scientific investigation. But they would have nothing of this. Lou Elizondo and Mellon, no, they kept going on this military thing. They didn't understand how parliamentary democracy worked. We're trying to explain that to them. They don't have any money for committees and stuff like that. And they kept going. And then they insisted at one point, the aide said, no, we are going to do a scientific investigation. And at that point, Chris Mellon said, that's the poison pill, I'm gone. And that was the whole thing. It was like, we're not going to tell you what to do, but unless you do what we tell you to do, we're not going to help you. And the whole thing fell apart. And that's what you see in front of Congress now is if they wanted this thing to be just, let's figure out what this thing is, let's do a scientific investigation, they would have gone to the Science and Technology Committee in the House and Senate. That's not what they did. They went to the Armed Services and Intelligence, which is all about weapons. So I'm very disappointed. I've said now that we have this, very difficult relationship with the United States in the last couple of months, I say, there's no way I'm going to help the Americans get disclosure for these guys because all they're doing is they're trying to get money. They're trying to get money for research, but it's the weapons people that control it. And I've got a little grandson who's about 14 months old or 15 months old, and I'll be, not going to help them develop weapons which they can turn around and drop bombs on my grandson. And this is the whole deal: is people got to realize this is some people call it loons, crooks, and worse. That all these people wanted money, and you have all sorts of people sitting on the sidelines, like scientists who are also, I call it stealing the saucers. So you have the black ops people who have the saucers. And then you have these people on the outside, say like Eric Davis and Al Putoff and people who are sort of in the white world who want this stuff released. But of course, the reason they want it released is because there's so much money. People have no idea how much money is involved. There's a NASA engineer who I had actually conversations with, this famous Tim Taylor guy. I had a conversation with him, and he had an invention he told me about that came to him, and he said, the last thing I remember the night before I got that invention, or the morning when I woke up with that invention in my head, was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. And I said, oh, Tim, could you see its face? He said, no, I couldn't see its face. I said, you should get regressed. You should go to Yvonne Smith and get regressed. But anyway, this invention had to do with metal and joints, where you don't get the rejection stuff in the joints. And this had been given to him by these ETs or whoever he was in contact with. And he has a protocol that he can contact them with. He's got 40 some inventions, patents. And the first one, the company that was part of that invention sold for $100 million on NASDAQ. So people realize there's a lot of money in this thing. So everybody wants it out in the public, not so much for you and I, but for the scientists who figure, oh, I can win a Nobel Prize. If I look at it, I can figure it out and stuff like that. And so I'm always hesitant about the disclosure. Even the public people, they say we want the disclosure. And I say, well, I chased this Dr. Eric Walker, who was the highest level official anybody's ever had in the United States. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees, was president of Penn State University for 15 years, was chairman of the board of the major military think tank in the United States. And he said to us, he said, why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? Admit it. You're just curious. And that's what it is. Most of the public, 99% of the public, they're just curious. They want to know. And they'll say, why do you want to know? And they say, well, then I'll know what's going on. And then I say, well, then you're going to leave it go? Well, no, then you can ask where they're from, why are they here? And it's a million questions, and it just keeps going. And then Walker, the other thing he said that I point out to people who want disclosure is he said, so when you figure it out, what are you going to do with it? It's the idea. What's a dog do when he catches the car that he's chasing? What are you going to do? And the people say, well, then we're going to get the saucers and we're going to get them back. And I say, well, what are you going to do with the saucers? You're a government official, you're a lawyer or whatever. You can't do anything with a saucer. You're going to give it to your friends, and you have all these issues of in the United States now. You see this situation, which gets a little political, but they've rejected 250,000 refugees from Ukraine, and they have to leave the country. They can't stay or whatever. And so I say, do you seriously believe that we're going to have disclosure and that there are going to be grays, reptilians, and mantids walking around the streets of America? Do you think anybody's going to allow that? Or even like the little dwarfs that are all hairy and stuff like that? I mean, people haven't thought this thing through of the complications that will come if disclosure does come, in terms of what do you do with the saucers? What do you do with the aliens? Are you going to allow aliens to run car factories? And because they don't get any, Elon Musk charges, he pays $20 an hour. These aliens make nothing. They don't have any money. They don't make anything. So they can make a car for like $1,000, and the car can have no engine, no fuel for the rest of your life. You can go to Mars for the weekend and stuff like that. And are you going to allow them to build cars to go against Ford and GM and stuff like that? There's no way. People haven't thought this stuff through. People are just sort of excited.
Well, yeah. Well, that's why the conversation about consciousness and who we are as spiritual beings having a physical life experience is so important. I had a woman on the show called Ann Tucker who channels the angels. She says they're the angels. I'm sure they're a mob. I'm sure they're just more than angels. But anyway, and she's very predictive. And she was talking about how the consciousness on this planet is changing, and that we're going through a great transition, and there's going to be a lot of shifting. And that sort of consciousness, like what you say is so true. Like people see something like disclosure and like, how can I make money out of this? And she was talking about business and how businesses that are in it for the end game, like the bottom line only, like I'm in this business to make money, will fall over, will topple. And businesses that are in for the greater, for humanity, like they're providing a service or a product that is serving humanity, will not, because there is a shift happening on planet Earth. And, a friend of mine's going through this at the moment. He has a business which services humanity in a way. It sort of services the vanity of humanity. And he's very conscious, but he's been very driven by money. And his businesses has been toppling this year. And he's all sort of upset about it and worried about survival and stuff like that. But he has forgotten, like when I say he, this is all of us. Like we forget that this life, we're creating this life, that we're not victim of circumstances. Exactly. And with the shift and everything crashing and toppling, like the president of the United States, he's a part of this big shift. People love him or hate him, but he's messing things up a lot. Like he is changing a lot of stuff. It's all a part of the plan, and we've got to ride this wave. And that's why the conversation on consciousness is because, like what will we do when ET is a part of our world and they bring their technology? I mean, the consciousness that drives the technology has to be about serving humanity and not making money or trying to kill people or trying to control people like the consciousness has been. So, that's why the consciousness conversation is such a big conversation at the moment.
There's even, as I mentioned before, I'd written this book called UFO Sky Pilots, where I get 36 people come to me all claiming they've flown the craft. And the first one came to me was in her 70s. I thought she was insane. Like, I'm going to throw you out of the house. I couldn't believe it. Like, come on. I think I've heard a lot of weird stories, but I'm thinking to myself, like I was thinking of Saudi Arabian women, and I'm going, they let you fly the craft? Come on, Saudi Arabian women can't even drive a car without a man in the car. They let you without an insurance or a license or nothing. Said, oh yeah, different models. And that's where you get this whole idea that it's this consciousness thing is primary, and that they have not figured out the crafts. This story you keep hearing over and over again is the fact that they put it on the shelf and they can't do it because of consciousness. I just interviewed Jack Sarfati. He's kind of a controversial guy, but I interviewed him, and he talked about a Navy guy and I said I did the sky pilot stuff about how you fly a craft and stuff with your mind, and he said, well, he knew a Navy guy who would run a program with a craft for 4 years. He said, not only is the craft conscious, it has its own will, has its own stuff like that. And that in Lockheed Skunk Works, the craft there will only let you in if you have the right attitude. They have not got in the craft. You can't even get in the craft without the right, the right mentality. And he said that the guy had gotten in the craft. He had flown the craft a little bit. And then you get this whole idea that the craft is so much more complex than people think it is. And it is the artificial intelligence of the future, but it relies on this whole idea of what you want, or you're creating your own environment. As you said, you're not a victim. So when people complain to me and they say, this is terrible, this is whatever, I say, just remember, if you believe in reincarnation, then you put your hand up. Before you came in, they said, oh, we're going to be in this period of time. There's going to be this crazy guy running the United States. There's going to be war all over the place. There's going to be this. And you go, oh, volunteer. It's like, and whatever situation you find yourself in, no matter how bad you think it is, if reincarnation is a fact, then you probably volunteer to be here at this time, in this place, in the middle of whatever mess you find yourself in. And maybe it is because you volunteered to come here and help fix it. And people always want to have this good and bad thing, when in the reincarnation world, it's all experience. So if you got abducted in your last lifetime, you do a reading and someone says, oh, you were abducted in your last lifetime, you'd say, hey, that was pretty cool. But in this lifetime, then the ego takes place, and oh, I'm a victim and stuff like that. And everybody knows as long as you consider yourself a victim, you'll never be cured of anything. And we wrote a book called Contact Modalities, about how people are able to get in the field, get the material that's all in the field, and come back. And one of the big things, I think I wrote 2 chapters on this idea of trauma. So people think this is terrible and stuff like that, but you start to realize that like a lot of women who had very difficult childhoods become mediums. And it's this whole idea, you're trying to shut out the world, and suddenly you're talking to your dead grandmother and stuff like that. And that's what people got to realize. Everything's an experience, and you may see it as good or bad, but in terms of Trump's got his role, and you can't see the light without the darkness. You need that polarity in order to realize which is which, and realize that it really comes down to, I came into the world for a reason. I'm going to leave. And according to Michael Newton, I'm a big fan of the Dr. Michael Newton life between life stuff, 7,000 people that were regressed. And they all say the same thing. When they get there, they ask you, how did it work out? And then the guy says, I forgot to do this, and I was going to do this. And you planned the whole thing. And you can't bring up, Hillary Clinton, the mother-in-law, the dog ate the homework. They go, time out. This is not about them. This is about you. How did it work out for you? Because you planned the whole thing. And in the end, everybody says the same thing. I could have done better. So this is where we have to realize that we came into the world to do something. When we leave, they're going to be asked one question, how did it work out? And you can't bring up anything else. And therefore, all we have to worry about is, what are we here to do, and are we doing it? What everybody else does is totally irrelevant. We are to figure out what we came in the world, and it's this idea we were talking about before. Remember who you actually are. You are not the puppet on the stage. Because you played King Henry VIII in grade 12 high school does not mean you're King Henry VIII. You're not King Henry VIII. You're playing King Henry. You're the puppet. Just read your lines and leave the stage, and it goes on like that. Or you even see this thing where people will talk about, I'm writing a book on extraterrestrial or maybe not, where I look at all these weird things about, is this extraterrestrial or is not? And one of the things, like Chris Bledsoe, for example, the famous experiencer in the United States, I recovered the transcript. He'd lost it. I had the transcript of his regression from 2008. And in there, the regressionist says to him, so Chris, and you got to remember, he's a deacon in the Pentecostal church, the most conservative Pentecostal church. And he has this good and bad, the biblical stuff and all this sort of stuff. And of course, they say to him, so when did you first meet these beings? He said, they've been with me since before I was born. And then the regressionist said, select in your last lifetime? And Chris said, yes. And that's the whole thing. If the alien is in your last lifetime, it is a little more complex than ET. It's a little, there's something else going on here. It's this idea that you got to remember who you are. Everybody's an etheric being. So they're playing aliens, we're playing human beings. And it might be that your soul group is playing that thing. You come and you abduct me and I'm going to do this and whatever. And we got to realize this may be part of what we plan to come in here and do, and that there is no good and bad. There's just experiences that you have. And it's not which cards are dealt to you, it's how you play the cards.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no separation between human, ET, soul, spirit, God, unified field, all
and they
whatever.
say that all the time. But nobody listens to the experiencers. The experiencers will tell you that over and over. I think it was the free survey of 3,200 experiencers. 54% they said they were talked to about oneness and love. 25% about reincarnation. 25% said the being was in their last lifetime. All this kind of stuff. But everybody ignores all those statistics. Or 37% say they've had a near-death experience. And you realize, like, do you have a random near-death experience and then a random abduction experience, or is it planned? Did you plan to have this? Did you plan to have a near-death experience to learn something, and an abduction experience to learn something? And that you got to realize that if I plan this, even if you don't believe it, if you consider the fact that whatever you did, you planned it, your whole attitude changes. Whether it actually happened or not, you're taking responsibility for whatever happens to you, and you're doing the best with what you've got.
Exactly. Radical responsibility. I think that's what the world needs, some radical responsibility. Stop blaming everybody for your problems. I wanted to read to you. I wanted to mention your books too. You've got a slew of books, which we've mentioned a couple of them. I think your latest book is Contact Modalities. Is that the one?
That was the big one. That was the one that really a lot of groups started using. Sky Pilots, I think, is the latest. I've written the 4th disclosure book, which is called Beyond Managing Magic, Landing the Plane. And the idea behind managing magic was, and the CIA actually picked up on this, was that it's not UFOs, it's magic. So if you get the CIA, they're not just looking at UFOs, they're looking at paranormal phenomena, regression, they're looking at remote viewing, and they realize it's all the same thing. So that's why I called it managing magic. And the landing the plane is, sometimes you get frustrated. We're not getting anywhere. And I was all frustrated, and it came as clear as a bell to me. I don't remember, it was in a dream or whatever. It came as clear as a bell. They said, Grant, don't worry about it. We know how to land the plane. And it's this whole idea that there's an intelligence running this thing. They're running the show, and they've probably done it on 1,000 planets before. They know exactly what they're doing, and they're going to land the plane. So quit worrying about it.
I wanted to just say to people too, I've got all the books on my website. It's a link under this. If you want to get Grant's books, I've got my Amazon links there. And when you buy his books, I get a couple of cents. Fantastic books, all of them. Beyond Managing Magic. So I've got that there with the red heading, Landing the Plane. What did I want to say to you? I wanted to say also that there's a few questions here from people, which I'll get back to you. I saw, Lisha, that you have a question about the Ponte. I'll get back to that. But I had a message last night downloaded to me as I was thinking about my friend who's been in chaos lately, because my life has been chaos. And a lot of people are talking about they've been going through this chaos lately. And this is what the mob said to me last night, which I posted to him, texted to him. And then I thought, gee, that's great. Let me put this on Facebook. Remember that the current chaos is not personal. It is a global phenomena, which is part of the big changes occurring this year. It is also not permanent, just an energy wave we need to ride. We can ride the wave with good humor and enjoy it, or with suffering. This is the experience we come to Earth to have, to remember we are not victims of circumstance. We are the creators of them, including the global chaos and changes happening right now. And I thought, whoa, that's a powerful message that came through last night.
That came to you. You have to send it to me, because my favorite channeler is a woman out of Albuquerque. She's not really public. But what I'll do is I'll look at something. I'll go, what about time and space? And I'll say, ask the guides about time and space. And then she comes, and then I give it to my assistant, Desta Barnaby, who's written a number of books on channeling, and she's like unbelievable in terms of, she knows everything. She's got all these abilities to channel. So I go, okay, so here's what Margie said. Okay, tell me what your people say. and she'll do this channeling thing, and then I compare the messages. The one that you just gave is identical to the one from Margie out of Albuquerque, and almost every message is the same. It's this, this concept where it's not personal, and this is necessary, and we're going to come out the other end, and stuff like this, and a change is happening, and stuff like that. And that's what people don't realize. They'll always say, "Oh, we don't believe channelers; they just making this stuff up." And I say, "I got $1,000 bet that you can't channel and fool me. There's no way, because there's certain things. If you take a look at the people like Paul Salek and Bashar and stuff like that, where they'll, if you transcribe it, what you and I are talking about, we'll go and the channeler who's doing a trans channeler's completely trans channel will never make a mistake. Like Paul Salek has 12 books, and they've only made 2 edits in any book, like taking out ams and us and stuff like that. And so that's the thing, is to me is to find these people who are in the field and listen to them, which is the UFO field. That's what people don't do. They want to use the people who have PhDs, and they figure because they're rational, analytical, they're smarter. They're not smarter. They're not tapped into. The people who have had the answers are the people in the field who are talking to the intelligence. And you cannot figure out what the UFO phenomenon is about without talking to the people who are dealing with the intelligence. That's why they went to Chris Bledsoe when all these people came to him and he had intelligence. And I even said to him at one point, I said, "Hey, did they ask you how to fly the craft? Because you flew the craft." And he said, "Oh yeah, they brought me into a 1-star general, and he wanted to know how it was done." So I explained to him how you fly a craft. And he had all these people on his property. And of course, because he's in the Bible Belt, he was taking a lot of static. His one kid quit school. He couldn't take it. He was being harassed so badly. And so Chris said to him, he said, you're destroying my family. Why are you, all you intelligence and military people here? And then the one guy says to him, "Well, Chris," he said, "it appears they like you. It appears that they're talking to you, Chris. They don't talk to us, Chris. They don't like us. So we're here to find out what they're telling you." And that's the whole point. Why would you not talk to somebody who's having experiences? But we want to put, even we used to do this thing where some guy's got a PhD and he's against UFOs, he's skeptical, and they bring him into a conference because he's got a PhD. And you figure, like, because he's got a PhD, he's smart. One of the biggest jobs I ever had in my life when I was young, I was at the university for 37 years. I went to university and then I was working at university. But when I first started, I was a bartender, and at the faculty club lounge. So I had all the faculty, like deans, presidents, vice presidents, and visiting presidents and stuff like that there. And I would sit there and talk to these guys, and they weren't like professors then. They were just like having a couple of beers, and after I had 3 or 4 beers, and I would argue some of them would argue with me. And I had a dean of plant science, the dean of engineering, education, and the dean of human ecology. We're talking about UFOs, and the one guy was arguing with me every night about UFOs and stuff like that. And then one day I said to him, "Hey, you're the dean of plant science. What do you know about UFOs?" And he said, "Nothing." And I said, "Good." And then I started to realize the fact they told me when I first got trained, they said, "Remember, don't get intimidated by these guys." And we always get intimidated by people with very high degrees and stuff like that who play like they're really smart. And he said, "Remember, when they've had one too many beers, they're just like any other drunk on the street." And that always stuck with me, was this idea that when you realize that academics are just ordinary people like anybody else, you couldn't tell. And people have such a high regard for these people. Instead of going to the people who are the experiencers, we want to do this thing where we're going to do it scientifically, and we're bringing guys like guys who are from Harvard and stuff like that. And I say that's like bringing in a cardinal, 43 years in a cardinal in the Roman Catholic Church. Would you bring that in? Well, no, because he's biased. He's going to be talking about Roman Catholic and Christianity. Well, it's the same thing. If we used to call it piled higher and deeper. PhD is piled higher and deeper. The guy would get a bachelor's degree, and then he didn't want to get a job. And so he would say, "Well, I'll get a master's degree and then I'll make more money." And then he'd get a master's degree, and then he would have no experience. So nobody was going to pay him for a master's degree when he had no experience. Then he'd go, "What am I going to do now?" "Well, I'll get a PhD and I'll teach it." And a lot of the PhDs that we knew, that's what it was. They got into this cycle where they did that. And people got to realize the guy with a PhD's got a very limited range of knowledge. That I had, my office was in the chemistry building, and the chemists never talked to the biologists. They never went into, and they have this little area of their expertise. So you're not going to argue him if he's a microbiologist dealing with cloning. You're not going to argue him about that, but he's not going to come and tell me about UFOs. He has no clue about UFOs. And we make this mistake of always letting the experiencers sit on the sidelines when they are the ones that are dealing with the intelligence, and they are getting very distinct answers as to what's going on.
Yeah, well, Grant was saying before that, you know, I asked him if he was involved in all the Congress stuff, and he said, as I said, that no, they're not speaking about experiences, they're just speaking about nuts and bolts and stuff like that. But I wanted to, Lisha, she asked a question. Have you heard of the Ponte Star Nation people? Sue Walker is a person that speaks telepathically.
I'm close to a guy in Canada. That's a very, very bizarre story. I've talked to her once. There's a musician who's in my Tuned In book who's gave me a lot of stuff on. They started contacting him. He took very great interest in the story, the channeling stuff that they were getting, and then they started, as you have the idea, that this hitchhiker thing. So then suddenly he started having experiences and stuff like that. So it's a very, very interesting story. They're working to verify this story, but yes, I'm familiar with the story, and it's fascinating. It's a very complex story in terms of the stories that are going on, especially when you start looking at the other people that are involved in there. But yeah, it's a very, very interesting thing. I've dealt with it not in the last little while, but for a while there, I was very closely watching what they were doing, and it was like another group that was trying to get their thing. And you get all these different groups or beings or whatever they are, and they all have a different way of coming at you. The same as channelers. Like there's no two channelers are talking to the same being. It's always like a separate being, and it comes from a different angle and stuff like that. Almost like it's a coordinated effort, but very interesting, the Ponte story.
Yeah. So Alicia says his Kevin is Estrella.
Estrella, yeah. He's the guy out of Hamilton who came to my he was just kind of curious, and he came to my lecture in Toronto on music, and then he started having experiences, and he's now written albums and stuff like that. That he talks the same thing about being able to channel the music and bring it in.
Yeah, amazing. Well, Lisha also contacts the Ponte. They come to her as well. And she's big into telepathy. She had a telepathy group for a while, but life got a bit busy. She might start it up again.
Maybe I have to interview her and get her, because that to me is the thing I try to do.
Do you want to be interviewed?
That's my thing is when you get these people who have these encounters, especially when you get the crossovers where you get Kevin and then the Sue or whoever was channeling, and you start finding more and more people, you get more and more evidence. The same way I worked on the Mission Rama stuff, where I started to gather their stories, and that's another one where, I mean, the three best stories I've ever had in my life come out of the Mission Rama experiences. And they're totally, most people didn't know who they are. I wrote 2 books about them, but didn't sell many copies. But that's an amazing thing. There's all these hidden stories that people haven't heard that I think need more publicity.
She says, I don't know about that, lol. Yeah.
What she's got to remember, what I always tell people, because we help people, we got a company, not a company, but we help people. It's called It's All Connected, which is the name of the company. We help people how to publish their books, so that it's recorded for the next generation, for their kids, that their kids may not be concerned now, but you should record all this stuff. And I always remind people when they say, I don't really know a book, I don't want to do it, I say, just remember, nobody's going to listen to it. You think that just millions of people are nobody's going to listen. Nobody will have a clue. So you always have that in the back of your mind while you're doing it. Nobody's going to listen to it. Or you just don't read the comments. When it comes out, people always get stuck in reading the comments. I said, don't read the comments. It'll never bother you what you say if you don't read the comments. If you start reading the comments, then people are saying stuff and you feel, oh, I'm being offended and stuff like that. Just don't read the comments. And remember, no books today never sell. I mean, there's almost no books sold today because people are into this. As pointed out, the attention span is 8 seconds. So
yeah, they're listening to podcasts. Yeah, I agree. And Philosophy of Light. What's your name? Philosophy of Light says, interview me. Mo came to me after saying hi to the Ponte for 6 months. Verified by Sue Walker in Albuquerque. Philosophy of Light. What's your real name? I like Philosophy of Love Light as a name. It's a great name. But anyway, so we were talking about the Congress isn't talking to experiences, but I have been watching, Ross Coulthard on News Nation. She says yes. Talking to people like Jake Barber, who are also saying that, in order he's telepathically communicating with the craft, and I loved this. This is so exciting to me. Like, he breaks down in tears when he talks about the love that he felt when he connected to an alien craft or a UAP or a UFO, whatever you want to call it, and talks about the love. So even though maybe Congress doesn't want to interview experiences, it is coming out in the mainstream, like Joe Rogan speaking to millions of people, Tucker Carlson, Ross Coulthard, it's all coming out. And the telepathy takes going gangbusters. I think I talk about it almost every show. You had Kai and Diane on your show. So, I was so excited to see that the conversation about telepathy is becoming this, mainstream conversation. It's out there and people are talking about it as a real thing. Yeah. Do you want to talk about telepathy and
Yeah, well, when I had my experience, people got to realize I had my nuts and bolts stuff. If I hadn't had my download experience February 26th of 2012, I would be just as stupid as everybody else. I mean, as I said, in 2012, I couldn't have spelled consciousness. I couldn't have cared less. I had no consciousness. I just had gone to a lecture by Colin Andrews in Laughlin, Nevada. He was lecturing on crop circles, and I knew it was very controversial because he just come out and said that 80% were hoaxed, and I thought people were trying to, ready to hang him. And so I think, well, he's a distinguished guy. I've never seen him lecture. I should go into the room and listen to him. So I went in there, but I had no interest in crop circles. So I was zoning out, which is one of the contact modalities. I was sort of daydreaming. And all of a sudden this came into my head, this idea that it is consciousness. This is the bottom line of the whole story. And I was given these 3 items. One was this top secret memo from 1950 from the Canadians that said mental phenomena may be involved. And that was significant because in 1950, nobody was talking to aliens. Adamski would not come forward until a couple days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb in 52. And 50, nobody was talking to aliens. And so yet the Canadians were told by the Americans that mental phenomena may be involved. And then the other thing was Ben Rich, who had said, when he was asked, how did they get here? He said, let me ask you a question. How does ESP work? And the guy said, everything in time and space is connected. He said, that's how it works. And Eric Walker said to us at one point, he cut us off. We were talking about the control group. And he said, let me ask you a question. When you know about ESP? And the guy who was interviewing him from Great Britain didn't have an answer. And he said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in by the control group. So in 2012, I got these 3 ideas instantaneously put in my head. And I went, oh, that's how it works. And it was I was just floored for 2 days. I couldn't think. My head was spinning. I would go, well, I've sort of figured it out, but I didn't really know what it meant. It was consciousness. I knew it had something to do with ESP and stuff like that. And that's how it developed. But in 2012, people don't realize they haven't been in this for 50 years like I have. And what they don't realize is that the phenomena keeps changing. It's morphing. It's changing all the time. In 2012, people don't realize that you did not talk about consciousness anywhere. Even if you get Jill Bolte Taylor, very famous woman who had the... yeah.
I was talking about it. And
Colin Andrews was talking about it, but very few people. You were really in the woo-woo thing. I remember even when before that, they would have the thing where you'd go to these big conferences like UFO Congress, World Congress, and you'd go there and there's 1,500 people there or whatever. And then you'd go to the room, and they have this massive room with all the tables and all the women with their crystals and stuff like that. And I was just look the other way as I'm going by their tables.
Don't look.
and then suddenly they turned out to be right. They were the ones.
Exactly.
It was the crazy, all these people doing, healing and all this kind of stuff. And that turned out because I was the same as everybody else. And Jill Bolte Taylor pointed out the fact that she was a neuroanatomist and she had this left brain hemorrhage where she suddenly, right brain hemorrhage, where she's suddenly out into the universe and she's not one with her body and stuff like that. And she was a very famous Harvard neuroanatomist. And so she raised the consciousness there, but she said she was not allowed to talk about it. And that's the thing, that it all comes down to the fact that as your message and as the other channel of messages say, we are at a point where things are about to flip. And that's what I say to people. So you and I have conversations, you have other people have conversations, the more and more podcasts, everybody's having podcasts. And the more we talk about it, the more the consciousness rises and it rises. And everybody says, I don't believe it, and they're all skeptical. And it's almost like Max Planck, the guy who invented quantum physics. He said, you do not convince your opponent. You do not win your opponent by convincing him he's wrong. He said, science advances when they die. And one funeral at a time, the idea advances, and the young generation is not offended with the idea. So what we do is we talk about it, and it's almost like the movies in Hollywood, Star Wars, and Close Encounters and stuff. And the skeptic turns it on and says, "I'll watch this stupid thing. I want to laugh." And he doesn't realize he's being subconsciously programmed. And it gets to a certain point where it just flips. Like 2017, and I think I mentioned this before the show. I thought it was going to all sort of melt down if they ever admit it. They'd never admit that they were investigating UFOs. Suddenly, the New York Times, that everybody believes, says, "Oh, yeah, they are investigating." It's on the front page. They are investigating UFOs, and then you think, well, it's all going to blow up. And what happened? Nothing. Nobody jumped off the bridge. Nobody committed suicide. The stock market didn't melt down because people were acclimatized. That consciousness was high enough. Everybody just went, "Yeah, I knew that. Just tell me something I don't know." And then now people are talking about, we don't want uncontrolled disclosure. This catastrophic disclosure. And I said, well, what could be catastrophic? They said, well, aliens, and they got aliens in bodies. I said, I guarantee you, if they came out and admitted that they've got aliens in bodies, everybody went, yeah, we know that. Okay, so where are they from? And it's just question after question. And that's what I think these guys are, even Jake Barber, because I talked about this 3 years ago. I had the book about this, and I'm going, did they set this up for my book, that they figured, oh, the book is out now, we'll send out some guy to talk about this stuff and let him talk about it? Because when he's talking about it, he said he went through this Dopster where they check your security, and you can talk about this and you can't talk about that. And I say, how is it possible that they allowed him to talk about psionics, that they were getting these crafts and bringing them in the U.S. military? That's got to be classified. How did they allow him to talk about that? And it's almost like I talked about it, and then the head of OSAP, the main program from OSAP, this guy's name is James Lakatsky. He came forward and he made dramatic statements. He said it's like 260,000 sightings in the database for the big DIA, the Defense Intelligence investigation. And he said, it's like driving down a road. He said, and you look around and every car is different. And this is the thing. And I suddenly realized, hey, that's the same thing that happened with the flying saucers. And I looked at the data, and sure enough, I had 36 people who had flown the flying saucer. And this is where you say, is this random or is this a pattern? So they're flying the flying saucer. So it's like a dream. You have this motif, overlying motif, and they all say the same thing. The being says to them, put your hand on something or whatever it is. And they say, go within yourself. It is within you. When you can imagine it, then we'll go there. And the one guy said, I want to see the Milky Way from a distance, by 50,000 light years. He said 1 second they were there and looking at from a distance. But the thing was, when Lakatsky said all the UFOs were different, I go, that's why. Because the one guy had told the story that he had his hands on this panel. He put his hands on a panel. And then I had a friend who from Candace from Boulder, Colorado. And I said, Candace, you said you flew in the craft too. She said, well, it kind of was like a dream. Yeah, but yeah, I had to remember. I think it was a dream. I said, just tell me the story. She says, well, I'm sitting there and there's this ball, and I got my hand over top of this ball. I'm not touching the ball, but I used my hand and I'm flying the craft. And I said, you didn't have a panel? You didn't put your hands on a panel? She said, no, I was on a ball. And then the next one comes along. Susie Hansen talks about she's got this joystick. She's using this joystick. And every one of the 36 people touched something different. Nobody did the same thing. And I go, what's the chances of that? It was so bizarre that they're all touching the same story, but they're all touching something different. And then Lakatsky had said that this, I mentioned before, that he said, we had a meeting with Congress, and people say Congress isn't being briefed, but he said this meeting inside Congress, and there was a senator in the room, which means the senator was briefed, and that was Senator Reid. And he said we had this long discussion, and I told them we had gotten inside a craft. We had a craft and we'd gotten inside it. And as soon as they talked about this thing where the craft allows people in and doesn't allow people, I said, that's what he's talking about. They finally got someone inside the craft. The craft finally allowed someone to get inside the craft. And it was this idea that the craft, unless you're thinking of love and stuff like that, you're not getting inside the craft. And that's what happens at Skinwalker Ranch, where people say, oh, people are injured. Look at what happened to Skinwalker Ranch. And I said, what happened to Skinwalker Ranch was there's 3 military guys who were special forces guys who were armed, who are going to hunt the Skinwalker. And it's a reflective phenomena. So whatever you put out, you get back. And what happened there was they're going to hunt the Skinwalker. And then the phenomena says, oh, hunt the Skinwalker. You want to play hunt the Skinwalker? Oh, we love to play hunt the Skinwalker. And next thing, these guys are running for their lives, and they won't come back on there. They're so scared about what happened. It followed them home, and they had the orbs and stuff like that. And it's this whole thing. And that's what Brandon Fugel, who's a big Mormon guy, when he comes in, his brother flies a helicopter, flies him into the Skinwalker Ranch. He said they pray as they come in to that site. And he said, he tells people, when you come in here, you make sure that you have your mind set properly, because you can get seriously injured on here because a lot of guys come in there and say, I'm not scared of this. And they all get injured. They all have these things. And that's what people have to realize. The phenomena is reflective, that we have the good and bad things. And to them, it's all experience. So if you need to learn this lesson, as Barbara Streisand's stepson said, they come to the world and they go inside your head and they see what's inside your head, and whatever's inside your head, they use to build a lesson. They have no other choice. So if you're in fear, you're going to have a fearful experience. The same as near-death experience, where people have, or psychedelic experiences. If you don't have the right mindset, set and setting when you're going in, if you're in a near-death experience and you're fighting it, you're going to have one of these really bad near-death experiences. The same when I did 27 psilocybin experiences, high dose things, and I wrote a book. I call it Psilocybin School. I just went, okay, I hate to do this stuff, but I go in and I say, I'm here to learn something. And I got within a couple of minutes of every experience, I knew exactly what the lesson was going to be. And they would give me these lessons on certain things. And it was the same thing. When I was always fearful when I went in, and I'd have these experiences where I was in hell and this thing's going on, and I'm going, oh no, and I'm trying to stop it and I can't stop it. And then I'd say, okay, that's it. It's my fault. No, I can't blame anybody else for this. This is going to last forever. I'm in hell and it's going to last forever. Boom, it's gone like that, instantaneously gone. And then I said, okay, next time they're not going to fool me. As soon as this starts to happen, I'm in hell. Then I'm just going to say, okay, surrender. And then it'll be over. And then they would fool you. They would run it. And it was the same thing. They made you forget the other thing. You're in hell, and different type of experience in hell, and it's going on. And then you go, oh, okay, this is the way it's going to be forever. And then it would end again. I go, man, they fooled me again. And they could do this thing. They would change the thing that you didn't recognize what was actually happening. And it was the whole idea. So in the beginning of the psilocybin book, I wrote this thing. I said, surrender is the rule. Believe me, surrender is the only rule. That unless you get rid of the ego and you go, that's the contact modality thing. All contact modalities are the same thing. It's the ability to shut down the left rational, analytical voice that's going, get rid of the noise, say, go for coffee. We're going to do some work here. And it's the right brain, the female brain, that taps in. And so that's why you get a lot of women who are more psychic than men, because they're more right brained. The men are into, let's have a fight, let's have a war, let's do this let's see how many toys we can get. Whoever's got the most toys when they die wins. Whereas the woman is saying, well, let's be a family. Let's try to get along. Let's try to do this kind of stuff. And that's what the phenomena is. The phenomena is very right brained. It's almost autistic. And you have this situation where they come in and people say, well, why would they come here to help us? And I say, because that's how it works. That's how it works. We're the only people in the universe probably who are into this left brain rational, the thing about stealing and killing and all this sort of stuff. The rest of it, once you get above that into the higher realms, it's all about helping. It's all about you're creating. God does not create the heaven and the earth. God creates the sparks of the divine, and we create the heavens and the earth. It's all made out of consciousness. So we're making this stuff, and that's what they're doing. They're making the world a bigger, better place, more love and stuff like that. And we're in this little world that thinks we got 80 years and we got to get 6 cars and 3 houses and stuff like that. And that's why the experiencers are so important, because they're putting that message. They'll always get the message. It's alive, it's conscious, and it's one. And that it's a verb.
It's alive, it's conscious, and it's one.
Yeah, and it's a verb. So what happens is what happens in science is it's a verb. It's all, if you have no time. If time doesn't exist, you're going to realize it's a verb, because you're going to see things just going from beginning to end, from beginning to end, and the body's losing 1 million cells a second and stuff like this, and it's just changing all the time. But what happens is, because you've got time, it stops things like frames. And so what happens in science is science turns everything into a noun. It's not conscious, it's not alive, and it's not connected to anything. It's just a noun. So there's the earth, the stars, and all sorts of stuff, and it's all just random. It's just banging into each other and stuff like that. And that's what's happened, is we've turned it into a noun. And that's what they'll do. If you make an argument to them, what they'll use is a noun. They'll just say, oh, that's evolution, that's creation, that's chance, that's placebo and stuff like that. And I always say to them, who the heck is that? And what horse did he ride in on? Because they're using naming theory. They'll just give it a name. They'll say, this is a name. Don't worry about it. We'll figure it out down the road. And that's where you got to realize it's a verb, and it's all alive. The whole universe is alive, and it's growing, and it's getting bigger. And that's what it's about. It's getting...
talking about driving the craft, and depending on your mindset and how you're vibing, whether the craft will even let you in or not. I think it was David Adair that spoke about that. he spoke about being a young boy taken into the military, and they had this craft, and they had all these scientists, and who was the German guy that he spoke to? Some big German guy, anyway. And they couldn't figure out how to even get into it. And they're all in their heads trying to figure out. And he's this young kid who's just full of passion. He was a young kid then. He's old now.
Yeah.
He was full of passion, and he used to make rockets, and he was just full of creativity and passion and incredibly scientific. And his vibe, just as soon as he went up to the craft just felt him and immediately let him in. And all the scientists are standing around going, what? How did he do that? Like, how? Just not getting that it was about how the craft could feel him, and he could telepathically connect with him, and knew his intention and knew what he felt and who he was. And like a psychic. Anyway, I have to do a station ID break. We're on, you're listening to Karen Swain, Accentuating the Positive on the United Public Radio Network and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network on 107.7 and 105.3 FM. Syndicated radio, 120 countries we're contacting. And my guest today is Grant Cameron, who used to be a nuts and bolts UFO researcher, and now is all about consciousness and love and unity and oneness, which is what I love about you, Grant. Yeah. Great conversation, but this is where the phenomena, as Ross Coulthard calls it, is going. It's going out of the nuts and bolts conversation into we are all one. We're all from, what people call God, because a lot of people who are scientists are very skeptical about all things religion, which I don't blame them, because religion has really sort of compartmentalized who we are as spiritual beings having a physical experience. But what do you think? There's a message here from Shirley about the Greys. Are the Greys, what does she say here? Are the politicians and the Greys working together? Do you think that the politicians and the Greys are working together?
There's various stories about this. Some indicate yes, some indicate no. So the ones I point out where I say no is there's a story that in February 54, Eisenhower had a meeting with the Greys. And I always point out, I said, no, there's no Greys before 61. The original message 2 weeks after that event in February of 54 said that he had met with etheric beings. And that would make sense. But I say it doesn't make any sense, this idea of the treaty. And I say it doesn't make any sense. So why would the United States sign a treaty with the Greys to allow them to abduct people in exchange for technology? So they're going to use the technology to shoot the craft down. And what if the aliens decide that they're not going to do the treaty? What are you going to do? Take them to court? And I say, if there was a meeting, because there was a letter that came out 2 weeks later that seemed to indicate something happened. If there was a meeting, people forget the nuclear connection. This happened February the 20th. And on March the 1st, actually, it happened in the Pacific, so it was actually February 28th. There was the first Castle Bravo test in the Pacific, and it was the biggest radioactive contamination in the history of the planet. And it was a test that was supposed to be 5 megatons. They miscalculated one of the ingredients, and it turned out to be 20 megatons. They actually had to rescue the guys 20 miles away off their island. There's radioactive fallout coming down. The island, they blew it up, completely disappeared, and the wind was going in the wrong direction, and it contaminated an island with all these natives living on it. And they didn't get these people off for 48 hours. They said, let's see how the savages handle radioactivity, and they used it as an experiment to see what the reaction of humans to radioactivity fallout stuff was. And so they left them on there. 95% of the people on that island got thyroid cancer. Just a horrendous story of something that happened. And so if I say if there was a meeting between Eisenhower and the beings, it was a meeting where they said stop the nuclear weapons, and Ike told them where to go. And a couple of days later, this major radioactivity event happens in the Pacific. But then there are indications where, yes, there's a story about the Holloman Air Force Base story. I was friends with the producer of this. I stayed at his place a number of times. And what he would talk about was the fact that he had the film from the Holloman Air Force Base film. And Eric Davis, who's famous UFO guy, astrophysicist, actually had 2 conversations, one with President Bush and one with President Ford, and they both confirmed, yes, Ford confirmed he had seen the film, a 15-minute color film of a UFO landing at Holloman Air Force Base. And they asked him, when was the briefing? He said, I'm never going to tell you where the briefing is. Don't even go there. George Bush had said he was briefed, he didn't see the film as a president, but he saw it as CIA director. And he said that he had been told that this was for real and it had very high security. And so that did appear to take place, that Holloman Air Force Base film. And the interesting thing about that was this idea about raising consciousness. So I was talking to Bob Emenegger, and I would keep asking him questions about the Holloman Air Force. They had to take it back, because what they did is they pulled the film. They were going to allow him to use it in his documentary called UFOs Past, Present, Future. And then at the very second, they said, oh, no, you got to hand it back. So then he handed the film back, and I said, hey, Bob, something weird about Close Encounter, the thing. I said, if it weren't for the location and the time of day, the Holloman Air Force Base story sounds exactly like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. There's 3 UFOs coming in, 2 of them move off, 1 lands, and the it's all planned. They got the cameras all set up and stuff like that. And I said, it sounds exactly like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He said, I didn't tell you. I said, no, you didn't tell me what? I didn't tell you I gave a copy to Steven Spielberg in 75. And the film and Close Encounters came out in 77. I said, no, you didn't tell me you gave a copy to Steven Spielberg. And he said, well, I told you, Annie Spielberg, his sister, worked for me. She was a line producer for us at the studio. And I said, oh, yeah. And then he said, when it came out, when Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out, Steven Spielberg's mother came to Bob Emenegger. She said, Bob, I've seen your version of the landing. I've seen Steven's version of the landing, and I like Steven's version better. So that's where you get this whole idea where you wonder where they get the ideas. And there was a guy by the name of Chase Brannon who was his job was to go to Hollywood. And if you were doing a movie on the CIA, he'd go to you and he'd say, hey, Karen, are you doing a movie on the CIA? And you say, yeah. You ever been to the CIA? No. Would you like to see the CIA? You're moving on. You're doing a documentary. Maybe if you saw the CIA, you'd get a better idea of how it works and stuff. And that's what they do. Instead of doing the thing where they block you and kill you, what they do is they walk beside you like a beggar on the street. They walk beside you. How you doing? And they stay in step with you, and they direct you to go in the right direction they want you to go. They're not going to stop you, but they get you going in the right direction. And that was Chase Brandon's job. He admitted it was his job. And he wrote a book called the Christos Conundrum, which was how the CIA handled the Roswell crash. And he said on record, he said, if you want a good read the book. If you want to learn something, read between the lines. And so it was all written fictionally. So if I'm a CIA spy or whatever, and I save the world from nuclear disaster, I want to tell my story. Well, you can tell your story, just change the names, change the date, all this sort of stuff. And so a lot of the books that are out there are fictional accounts of real stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Wow. There's just been, I mean, you hear people talk about, I don't believe in the UFO phenomena or life in outer space, or there's no proof, but oh my God, there's so much proof, isn't there? There's just so much proof, and mind blowing.
I can make one point on that. I had another download in 2016, and what they were saying, is it this or is it this? Is it this or is this? You think it's this, it's actually this. You think it's this, it's actually this. And it's exactly the opposite. And this is this whole idea about belief. So someone say, I don't believe, and it's like, well, that doesn't mean anything. You can take all the belief in the world and $1, and you can't buy a cup of coffee. It doesn't. It's the experience. That's the whole idea. We're doing this thing about belief and non-belief or whatever, and the experiencers know, and they will tell you, like in when you have a download experience, or Paul McCartney got the song, they know it comes to you with absolute certainty. That was my 2 downloads. I remember the second time it was 24 things they gave me. And I remember it came, and I know, and even today, I know when I'm in the field. I know when I'm not in the field. When I'm in the field, I know, get the pen out and start writing. And I was writing, and it was cold. I remember I had take my glove off, and I'm writing in this piece of paper. And then it's sort of after about 14 or 15, it sort of faded away and it went back normal. I knew exactly what street I was on. I'm walking downtown. That was my thing. I walked 6 miles downtown. So I'm walking there, and all of a sudden it starts again. Get the pen out. I start again. And it was this thing. Is it random or is it pattern? Is it, is it this or that and all this sort of stuff? And that's the thing. We basically got everything backwards, that we're using our 5 senses. And what I sort of predict is that everything is going to turn out to be wrong. Everything we believe is going to turn out to be wrong, because time and space are messing stuff up. If you say to people, you're living all your lives at the same time, all stacked on top of each other. People go, are you crazy? And it's like the world is going to be so weird when you get right down to it. And that's what I found after 50 years. The deeper you dig into the UFO phenomena, the weirder it gets, the more complex it gets. And I remember I had the one thing when I was doing this psychedelic thing, the one message they had for me, and they kept hammering it. They got me really angry. It would go every session after session. They'd come in and say, you think you know everything. You think you got it all figured out. Let me tell you, you haven't got a clue. And then they go next time and the same thing.
Hang on. So you did some psychedelics. What, you took mushrooms or ayahuasca or something?
I took five grams. I did the high dose psilocybin with the mushrooms.
And when you say they came in, so you
whoever it was, there was never anybody. This is a key point. There was never anybody. I never saw anybody. I never really. It was mostly dark. And then when I was with the people on the ship, the one guy said to me, he said, I was on the ship, and he said there was somebody behind me, and they said, okay, go ahead and do it. And I said, I don't know what to do. And then they said, you know what to do, just do it. And he put his hands on this panel. And then somebody else. And then I was listening to Jim Semivan, who is the experiencer. He's the CIA guy. He's an equivalent of 2-star general. He had the beings in his room. And he tells this story. And he said, I'm still angry. They're in my room. Terrible. And they didn't get my permission. And they injured my wife. And he's all upset. And then the guy's trying to get him to talk. I don't want to talk about it. They're still investigating it. And this is in the early 1990s. And then the guy said, so Jim, was there any telepathy involved? He said, that was the weirdest thing. He said, I was standing there with my wife, and there was somebody behind me. I don't know who it was. I don't know if it was an alien or what it was. He said, but it had this guardian type thing going on about it. And I went, guardian type thing? And then I said to the interviewer, I said, ask him on the left side or right side. Because you do the Michael Newton thing, your soul guide stands on your left, on your left side. And I'm thinking, he's talking soul guide. So this may all be like a setup. And his soul guide is there and all this sort of stuff. And so I actually went and I started asking people. I went to Whitley Strieber. I said, wait, Whitley, you're on board the craft? He said, yeah. I said, hey, you ever had anybody behind you that's telling you what to do? And you don't get to see, you're not allowed to turn around and see them? He said, all the time. He said, I told you I was going to steal the craft. I was sitting there and I was thinking to myself, I'm sitting at the panel board and I said, I think I'm going to steal this thing. And he said, somebody behind him started laughing. Telepathically.
Who wanted to steal? Whitney Strieber wanted to steal the craft?
He wanted to steal the craft. That's what he was thinking. He said suddenly you heard this person behind him telepathically laughing. So when I was doing the psilocybin thing, I didn't realize this till after I did the book and I started realizing these people had somebody behind them all the time. And then I'm thinking, hey, that was the same thing. I never saw anybody in any of my 27 high dose sessions, but somebody was telling me what to do. And I'm thinking it was from behind me because it was always there. And they were showing me things and stuff like that.
But I want to say something. Grant, everyone, has this. I mean, you could call it a guide. You could call it your higher self. You could call it your soul. You could call it your spirit. You could call it God. You could call it your guardian angel. It doesn't matter what you call it. Yeah. But we are never left alone in this human earth experience. We are guided. And this is actually what I teach people. I connect them to their guides. I teach people how to be telepathic, if you like, or psychic. But all of us are. Like I had this conversation with Joe, who's the owner of the network, and he said, I used to believe that everybody was psychic, but now I don't know. No, I don't think everybody is psychic, but I believe that everybody is. Yeah. Everybody has the ability to telepathically communicate. Back in my 20s when I read the Seth books, the Seth books. Seth said in the books, he said, all of you on earth are telepathic and you all are communicating telepathically on a subconscious level. You couldn't drive on your roads if you were not. And I started thinking about that when you drive. Like there's something going on when we drive that we are not consciously, many of us are not consciously aware of, that we are connected to every other driver. And I started to imagine if we weren't telepathically connected to every other driver, you wouldn't. Like, have you ever been to India or a place like India where there is just chaos on the roads? Yeah. And yet, for the most part, nobody's getting killed or damaged. I mean, it does happen, but it's amazing how much of this phenomena is happening all the time to everyone. Yeah, it's not just experiences.
With the abduction thing, everybody thinks it's like you get taken on there and they take your sperm or your egg or whatever and they torture you and then let you go. And when you start looking deeply, you realize all these weird things that are happening there, that it gets more complex. And then you start wondering, what are they actually on the ship for? What are they actually teaching? Like I had the one where the spiritual connection, the biggest one I ever had, is a guy, I'm actually interviewing him for about the 10th time in a couple of days. His name is Ron Johnson. He's a Mormon guy out of Utah who's had experiences for 50 years. And he has the experience where where he flies the ship. And then he has his being, whose name is Elby. Everybody has the being. I'll actually say, when the person's on the ship, I'll say, so what's the name of the person you were dealing with? And they go, they tell you who it is. There's always one person that they deal with that tells them everything. And his name was Elby. And Elby took him to the spirit world 3 times. And in the third one, he's telling me the story. He says the second time he's his dead mother. He's talking to his dead mother, but he can't see her. The third time he's in a field and his mother's there. And it's like, he says, it's like you and me talking. It was like, as real as real. And his mother says, Ron, when you die, you're going to have a room in this building. And she points to this building over there. And he said, looked like a Mormon temple out of some town in Utah or whatever. And then they go into this building. And he said, I walked into the building with my mother. He says, and Grant, it was like 10 or 100 times the size inside as it was outside. And I'm thinking to myself, really? Are you in a UFO? Or are you because that's what people describe in a UFO. It's 100 times the size inside. And I'm thinking, like, are you in a UFO? Or are you in the spirit world in a thing? And then his mother tells him the story. This other thing that was, you see the crossovers. I'm actually writing a 2-part book that's about to be released on these crossovers, where you see these things that they happen in all these different phenomena. People think it's just one phenomenon, and you suddenly realize it's happening in all these phenomena. So he says, well, she takes me down the hall of this huge building, and there's this table, and there's these crystals in the table. And she says, Ron, when you die, you're going to get one of these crystals in the table. And you look at it at a 45-degree angle, and you can see your past life and your future lives and stuff like that. And I said, really? And I'm thinking, this is Michael Newton. Michael Newton, you go into the spirit world, and they open the books, and the books, they have the crystal, and you look in the crystal, and it tells you your past and future life. And I'm going, this is like exactly what Michael Newton talks about in the spirit world. And then he says he's looking there, and then Richard Doty's the other one on one of the big documentaries. He said the most amazing thing I saw in the whole time was the crystal, that the aliens had a crystal, and they showed it to the U.S. government, and they actually showed the crucifixion of Jesus in this crystal. And so it's 3 different people all talking about this crystal. And he even told the story. He said, I looked, and he said, oh, there was a crystal with my dog, and my dog died in 1972. It disappeared. I never knew what happened to it. So he said, I'm watching this thing. I'm looking at to see what happened to my dog. And he said, at the very end, the neighbor shot the dog, put it in the back of the pickup, and went to the dump and threw it in the dump. And he said, your dog had a crystal? He said, yeah, everybody's got a crystal. And so this is this whole deal that you think it's one experience, but when you start getting all these different, what you have to do, you got to get all the different paranormal phenomena and take them all seriously, that these people are not making it up. They're just telling stories. And you start seeing all these crossovers, and you realize it's all the same thing. It's all one thing. And that's what Ray Hernandez, if you ever interviewed him, he had the experience. He saw me giving a consciousness lecture. He came to me, and he realized there was this connection. And I said, well, I'm coming to Florida. That was actually after this citizens hearing thing. I'm coming to Florida. I'm going to lecture there. Come to the lecture. I'm going to talk about consciousness, and then we can talk about your experience. So 2 days after that, he's in Miami. He's driving down the freeway, and it's complete gridlock. He's totally stopped. He's listening to NPR radio about some guy making art forms out of people's body fat. And he says, that's pretty weird. And he said, suddenly, boom, he's out of his body, and they're showing him this wheel, and the wheel is going around, has all his spokes, and one is remote. He sees the visions of remote viewing, UFOs, psychic phenomena, all this sort of stuff. And in the middle is this consciousness. And the beings say to him, Ray, you got to quit parsing it. It's all the same thing. And that's what people got to realize. All these parallels between different phenomena. It's all made out of ooly stuff. It's all made out of consciousness. We're behind this whole thing. And people want to break it into like nouns and things that are happening. But you realize that you and I get to play in the greatest game, whether it's the Super Bowl or the World Cup or whatever. And not only do we get to play it, or know that the game is going on, we're inside the stadium and we're on the field. Now, we may be with the water boy or whatever, whatever it is, but we actually know there's a game. Most people in life live lives of quiet desperation. They have no clue what's going on. They have no clue this stuff. And you and I got to do it. So that gives us almost like the idea that when you come, if you go in your future life and you say, how did it work out? You and I can't say, well, I didn't have anything. We had all the information. The onus is, the more is expected. Like the Bible says, too much is given, much is expected. And because we have so much information, it is up to us to share it, not to hide it under a basket. This sort of idea.
Yeah. We've got a little bit of information. I think that it's so vast. It's so vast. I mean, you've got 50 years under your belt, and I still think we're scratching the surface.
Yeah. And that's what happens in anything, whether you're looking out into outer space or in the quantum thing. Remember, David Bohm had said at one point, he said, when you get to that thing and figure out the whole thing about the quantum level, there's just another level below that. It's like, no, there's not. Or if you look out into the galaxy, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And I remember like the scientists are always like, oh, we've got this all figured out and proof. And we proved there's like 100 billion galaxies. And then one day I remember reading an article, and it's like, oh, they changed it to 2 trillion. I'm going, are you kidding me? You're complaining about a psychic not getting something right. You got 9 out of 10. You didn't get 10 out of 10. And then you clowns are out by 20 times. It suddenly goes from 100 billion to 2 trillion. And that's not even news. It's like, come on, you're just making it up as you go along. Even like, what's his name? Rupert Sheldrake said this whole thing about dark energy and dark matter. He says, you know how much dark energy and dark matter there is in the universe? And the person says, how much? Just enough to make the equation work. And it's like we're sort of filling the gaps in with different things, and all they've done is name it. We can't explain it, and it's got to be there, so it's dark energy, and nobody's seen it, but we make up these things, and that's what we're doing. We're just, as Wilbur Smith, the guy who ran the Canadian government UFO program, said, science is sort of like an egg, and it gets a crack, and you put a Band-Aid on it. It gets another crack, another Band-Aid, and next thing you got Band-Aids all around this egg.
Amazing. But, going back to the telepathy tapes, and you were talking about when the consciousness is ready, the collective consciousness, critical mass, if you like you said, in 2017, they released information, and everyone said, tell us something we don't know. That's what's happening with the telepathy tapes right now. I mean, it's going viral across the world, and people who weren't believers are sort of saying, I always believed in that stuff. It's like, no, you did. But I was listening to Deepak Chopra because he was one of my first teachers. He was on a podcast with Dr. Now, what's her name? She's the actress in that comedy show, Mayim Bialik. Oh, I don't know how to say her last name, but she's a physicist, and she played in that comedy show. Somebody help me out here online. Anyway, and he was talking about how he was doing the same thing years ago with interviewing kids that had telepathy. And she said to him, oh, so you were the first telepathy tapes? And we've been talking about it on the show. Like, I've been showcasing spiritual teachers, and I teach people about telepathy and psychic ability and all that stuff for years. And all of a sudden, like, everyone's talking about it like it's a new thing. And it's like, it's not new, but
that's what happens. It sort of just flips. Like I always say to people, like, when was it suddenly okay for gay marriage? And they go, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years. I don't know. So it just happens. Nobody realizes it. You just move on, and we go on, and that's what our moment has come. We've got both the disclosure thing being forced by Congress, and we have the telepathy thing. And if you get more and more of these witnesses coming out to confirm, as Lukatsky did, the guy that ran the program, he said, we now know that the propulsion of the UFO is a part physical and part psychic. And the other thing he said was that we've discovered that there are men in black. There are, and then he said, like government, no, men in black, like the aliens. And then he said, but the thing is, what are they doing? Are they scaring you, or are they dragging you in? Which is my theory. I have the theory called the theory of wow. Or I call it the Jesus circus, where what is the phenomena doing? It's not doing anything. All it's doing is making you go, what the heck is that? Light in the sky, or what the heck is, this thing came into my head, and they're doing this stuff, and it's like the Jesus thing. Like, if Jesus hadn't walked on water, or like aliens floating along the ground, or it fed 5,000 people, and the aliens have done that too. They made stuff appear out of nothing, or raised people from the dead, and 50% of all experiencers claim they can heal people. If Jesus hadn't done that, you never heard of Jesus. So what you do is you do all these miracles, and then once everybody's watching the miracles, they go, holy cow, and then you get the message. You can't give the message before you do the miracles. So what they're doing is just getting people's attention by doing all this weird stuff, and they keep changing. They were doing ground traces from the 60s to 2000, and the people, Stanton used to say 4,000 ground traces, the physical evidence. There has not been a ground trace for 25 years. They've stopped doing that. They started crop circles. Now that's sort of fading out. Cattle mutilations don't happen anymore. And they do this, and let's do this. It's almost like a school on the other side. They say, the grade ones say, well, let's put lights in the sky. We got why do UFOs have lights? So you can see them. That they don't need lights. They put lights on. And then the second one is cattle mutilations. And they do these really bizarre cattle mutilations downwind and downstream from nuclear power activities, because it's a message. They want you to come with a camera. They want you to take 100 pictures. They want everybody to see it. They want this, they're trying to raise consciousness. And that's what they're doing, is this weird stuff that's raising consciousness.
Yeah, that's right. They're telling me online. Yeah, Mayim Bialik from Big Bang Theory is the name I couldn't get.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I want to tell you, I mean, I love that, everyone's tuning into Big Bang Theory, and she's got this podcast show and she's talking about telepathy and consciousness.
Yeah.
She's talking about all this stuff. And another way that this conversation is now infiltrating the mainstream, because that Big Bang Theory show is just massive. It's just huge. And she's like out there. But I want to tell you before we go, because we've got about 10 minutes left.
Yeah.
I think about that conversation I had with you a lot about how the ETs put the message in the music, because music is, it's like everyone listens to music, and some of the biggest bands in the world, like most of them, were getting the download from the ETs, as you say, because they're creative brains and they're just like downloading the psychedelic sort of. Some of them think that the verses and the writings were just because they had big trips or whatever, because they were sort of trippy, like the silver spaceships are going to come and pick up humanity because after the gold rush. But I was sitting on the couch one day watching some children's television shows about these two twins that came to Earth, and they were telepathic and they were teaching people. And it was back in the 80s, 90s, this television show. It was called Under the Mountain. Do you know that television show?
No.
Anyway, and I'm sitting on the couch looking at the sky, and I saw this sort of triangular star shape, like stars that look like a triangle. I'm like, oh, it's a triangle. Looking back at the television, kept looking out the window, looking back at the television, and my attention was like drawn to the stars. And then one of the stars on the corner just became bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it just slowly sort of grew and woo, like this. And I'm watching it. It's not happening in a second like it normally happens. It's like taking a few seconds, and I'm thinking, is this really happening? As I'm watching this star, what I thought was a star, just grow bigger and bigger and bigger into this massive light, and then it went back in. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, that's you guys up there. Because I often talk to the galactic mob, as I call them. And they said, yeah. And they were talking to me telepathically, because I was thinking about you and the messages in the music, and how this message is also on television shows, but not just the alien message that they're going to kill us, Independence Day and all that stuff. And yeah, they made me watch all these television shows from these kids, and they said the message is also being put in your television, and but mostly the positive message, mostly through children's television. And I'm like, whoa. So yeah, they've been inspiring, not just music but television shows. I don't know what happened with the people that put out, I mean, like you said, Spielberg, he put out those big movies, but most of the big movies have been about how the aliens are going to come and kill us. Because
that's always the thing, is you're the money thing. That's how people make money, is that you need it's like God goes into a movie theater and with his popcorn and Coke or whatever, and then it's I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you. Oh, this is boring, man. I'm going to go next door, watch Star Wars. And that's the thing, is you always need that. That's what Chris Bledsoe had, where they wanted to do his movie, but they said we want to change. We want to put they're going to put reptilians in the end. He said, no, you're not. It's going to do. There's no reptilians. Well, no, Chris, I need to control the end of the movie. He said, no, Chris, you can't. We don't allow you to control the end of the movie. And that's the whole thing, is this duality thing that makes money. That you need the good guys versus the bad guys. Otherwise, nobody's interested. But you mentioned, it's a funny story just before we close. There's a funny story. Is this development to where it's aliens in 1896. It was guys from Mars, because we believed in Mars and stuff. And if you go back, you actually see I'm doing another book. Inspired was the other book where I did music, I did poetry, I did all the different things, where Nobel Prizes and stuff like that. I'm doing another one where I talk about musicians in like Handel and Bach and all these guys. And did they get these inspirations? Sure, they did. And they believed that they were talking to God, not to aliens. They were talking to God. And there was a funny story told by Beethoven, where he wrote this one symphony, and there was this one left-handed violin piece. And the guy who was playing it went to Beethoven. He said, that was absolutely terrible. I can't believe you put that in there. It's so bad, it's not even playable. And Beethoven says, I will let you know that when I wrote that thing, I was communing with God. Do you think I had time to worry about your little violin piece? So these guys all believed in God, and it's be the same thing in other cultures, that you're getting other types of encounters like Eastern, where the story is completely different, and it comes in different ways. But we have to be able to understand it, because as I said, like when my father died, he 2 days before he died, his father came to him. And he didn't tell me. He told my mother, he told my sister, he didn't tell me. And I talked about weird stuff my whole life. And he always wanted to play the skeptic. So I wanted to see what happened at the end. But he said his father was there. And then my mother said, so he was here. Oh, really? What do you have to say? My father said, he was just here. That's all you need to know. And the thing was, I say this whole idea about who are we dealing with? If anybody, my grandfather had lived 1,000 different lives. If he came as anybody else other than my father would have known who he is. So the person they have to take on whatever body, like there's an Israeli experiencer who actually predicted these fires in Australia. And he said that he was told, when we come into your world, we take on a body. We can take on whatever body we need to do it, to do our work. We don't need to. You can do the same thing. You just don't know it. And it's this idea that whatever your belief system is, they're going to come in that belief system in order to talk to you. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on. It doesn't relate to you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, what would be the message before we go 5 minutes? We talk about spirituality as like we compartmentalize it on earth. We put it in religion, or we put it in the woo-woo basket. But the rest of the cosmos, the rest of the universe is absolutely up to speed, that we're all one with source energy.
Yeah.
And
oneness is the message. Absolute number one. It's the only message. In fact, people will say, we're going to have ships and we're going to get technology. And I say this is, and then you have the other version that we're locked on. We're in a prison planet. And the reason we're on a prison planet is because we don't realize the idea of oneness. That's how they move from one place to another. They're not flying through space. They're popping from one place to another. They understand everything's connected. Everything's one. Everything, and you can go from one place to another. And that's why when the alien says to you, it is within you. Go within yourself. And when you can imagine it, then we'll go there. Or when Stephen Greer does the beginning of the whole CE5 thing, he quotes the Sufi expression: you see yourself as a puny form when within you is enfolded the entire universe. And the near-death or the out-of-body experience people will say, you have to go within to go without. You're not going anywhere. Or the remote viewing people, where are they going? Are they flying to Jupiter to do a remote viewing, or are they here? And that's what the whole idea is. When you give the guy the target 453709, he says, I'm at the target. He doesn't say, hang on, I'm flying there. I'll be there in a minute. He goes within himself. Everything is within yourself. And that's where we got the contact modality, is everything's in the field. And it's the ability to shut down that male talking thing that's giving the noise in the signal and pick it up. And then you realize that you could get in there and everything's there. Everything's like an internet. You load stuff into the internet, your experiences, and you can download from the Akashic field or the field or whatever it is. And once you realize that, then you make the understanding that nobody's different. We're all the same thing. We're all cells of the body. And when you decide that you don't want to be a cell of the body, you're going to just keep duplicating. It becomes a cancer cell. And it's the separation. I say evil. The definition of evil is very simple. All that's considered to be evil in the modern world is created by one thing and one thing only: the mistaken belief in separation. If you realize you're one, you can move to different planets and you realize everything's one. You're not going to steal other people's stuff. You realize would you cut your own hand off? Would you kill your own kid? No, it's all one. And you have to have that female thing where we're a family. We're all one, and we're all working to make the universe a grander and more beautiful place, and that our ultimate experience, our ultimate source is we are all etheric beings playing human roles, and that we're all going to go into the same thing. And when you meet these people in the spirit world, they're all the same thing. There's no difference between anybody, and that's the key to the thing: is the oneness rule and love. Love is the core of the universe.
Yeah. Playing human roles and playing ET roles and playing spirit guide roles and playing angel roles. There's a lot of roles that we're playing. We're also playing roles as souls or spirits, or we're all consciousness having a multitude of experience. And here on earth, the mistaken belief in separation is what gives us all the contrast that we experience here on earth, that we think we can't have what we want. And in fact, we not only can we have everything we want, we're the creator of it. We're the creator of the lack, and we're the creator of the abundance. It's all within us, within the mind. 2 minutes to go. Darling one, it's been such a joy and a pleasure reconnecting with you again. You're doing amazing work. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done over this 50 years. I love that you've had this transition from the nuts and bolts, because you've brought all those people with you into the consciousness conversation, which is, the consciousness conversation. Thanks, Don. Don's amazing. Have you had Don? Oh, he's shy, he doesn't want, but Don has been on my show, Wonderful Conversation. He's one of these incredible experiences here on Earth.
Well, we may all have had the experience, like you and I may have had the experience. I always say to podcasters, you said you were going to do a podcast. I come on your podcast show, and we arranged this all before we came here. And this is what it's all about. We're just playing our little roles. Or as Sir Fatty said, I just laughed when he said, just read your lines. We're here to read our lines. Just read your lines.
So 2 seconds to go. Anything you want to tell people before we go? You do have a Weebly website up, I think, because your other website went down.
And I have a consciousness podcast called I forget the name of it. UFOs, consciousness, UFOs, and the paranormal. And I have my White House UFO YouTube site where I do the occasional interview. I do mostly consciousness type stuff now.
Yeah, if you put in Grant Cameron into
that's what my kid said. But somebody asked my kid's not into it. But one guy said, "Hey, what's your old man do?" And he said, "Put Grant Cameron in a Google search," and he walked away.
Yeah, exactly. You'll find him. But I've got all your links on the link underneath the show where you can get the books. I've got, your Facebook links, Instagram, Twitter or X, YouTube links. Thank you so much for being back on the show. It's been a joy and a pleasure.
Thanks.
Big love to everybody. Thanks everyone that's tuned in with your great questions and comments. I didn't get to all of you. It's always a joy and a pleasure. I've got another outstanding, incredible guy coming on the show, Sean Clayton, next week, who's just beautiful and extraordinary. Check out his Instagram. He's got 300,000 followers on Instagram, but he's just beautiful, talking about love and all that stuff that we talk about here on the show. Big love to you. Thanks again. Bye for now.
Okay. Talk to you later.